Greetings, folks, and welcome to the show today. I'm delighted to have with me Guillermo Marquez-Sterling, who's written a book for Santos Books that will be out in January entitled Killing the Butterfly. Welcome, Guillermo. And just why don't you talk to us about the title, the subtitle, where this book came from? And it's just delight. I'm delighted to have you on the show.
Well, thank you, Conrad. First of all, thank you for inviting me for the show and for publishing my book. It's a memoir. It's a memoir that I have written based upon my mother's uh, memories that she shared with me. And Killing the Butterfly is a title that is supposed to invoke shock because butterflies are so beautiful and they're so delicate that most people admire butterflies from a distance. Those who like to catch butterflies and collect them, even those people, do it with gentleness. And so this image of a butterfly being killed is supposed to invoke a bit of horror, especially in people who love art and love beauty and nature. And the metaphor is about democracy. That democracy is as delicate as a butterfly, and this whole thing of killing democracy is is really a very sad thing that has happened in history, specifically in the island of Cuba, which is where the book takes place. The subtitle is for Killing the Butterfly. The subtitle is A Cuban Memoir of Democracy's Demise, and it begins in 1950, and the book takes us all the way through to 1959, the entrance of Fidel Castro and Che Guevara into the island of Cuba. And how did that happen? How did those revolutionary figures come into the island and were able to set up an authoritarian system? Well, it was because the groundwork was laid for them, and it was laid for them by another authoritarian figure, a dictator by the name of Batista.
Hmm.
But while all that political world is happening, there's common people living in the island, and that was my mother. My mother was born in Cuba, 1934, and she grew up in the island. And around the age of 16, the year 1950, she was a beautiful teenage girl who met my father, and he was a young, lawyer, just graduated from the university, and their love story began. But in the meantime, both families, my father's family and my mother's family, are going through their own crises, their own family drama. And I found it interesting that if I put those side by side, there was actually some correlation with the drama in the island, the different historical moments that were turbulent. But the thing is that, more importantly, I want the reader to see how normal and booming economy Cuba had. Cuba was a very, very promising nation. It had been a democracy, for less than 50 years, maybe 30 plus years, and there was just infrastructure was being laid, and people were beginning to practice the institution of democracy, when all of a sudden there was this bloodless coup d'état in 1952, and that then started to spiral the island downward. And eventually Fidel Castro came in with his revolutionary militia, and the rest is history.
So I'm intrigued by a number of things. First of all, I want to say to the audience, this is a wonderful book. This book is a page turner, and you will not lay this book down. I have a student, a senior student, who read the book and came back to me, Guillermo, and just said, I couldn't put it down. This was, she loved the read. The book is so much dialogue. Let's talk first about that. It is poetry, Guillermo. So it's
Thank
a
you.
very serious topic, but in the meantime, you have this ongoing conversation among your family members that is lighthearted, that is serious, and so you hold together the common everyday experience with the heaviness of what's happening in the world around them. And I think in so many ways, that's the experience of all of us. As we talk, we've got this Hurricane Milton coming across Florida, and yet the rest of us are living our everyday lives, and somehow we hold all of this together. So you do that so well. Why don't you talk about your form and just how you write?
Well, thank you. First of all, I write because I could do no other. It is my art. It is my craft. I think I've said this to you before. I'm at my best when I'm in the middle of a writing project. It's just the creativity in me comes out, and when I know of a story, it stays within me. I have to get it out, and I start to write. And I've been writing, now for many decades, and I've learned that that dialogue is a very useful tool for the characters to tell us what is happening without there being a third person omniscient narrator constantly interjecting and telling us what is it that we're seeing. And I want the reader to fall in love with the characters. My mother was a delightful and funny teenager. She was she grew up to be a very beautiful woman. And she came from a family that had their own business, a family business that came from Spain. So the roots of the family are from Spain, and they used to do a thing called photo engraving, an industry that no longer exists, thanks to the advent of computers. But photo engraving was a step in the printing process. If you wanted a magazine with photographs printed, it would first go to the photo engraver, who would engrave the plate for which the printing would occur. And so that was the family business, and just about every member of the family worked in it. And my mom was, the beautiful, buoyant, artistic, theatrical teenage girl that was always making fun of things. And early on in the book, she describes to me an encounter that she had with cockroaches. The family had just moved into a house, and unbeknownst to them, all the pipes were full of cockroaches, and the cockroaches come out. And the story is, it's a tall tale. And the thing is that in my mother's mind, it was so traumatic that she describes the cockroach as if it were as big as a squirrel. And so and then, but it's, this whole, coming out of the cockroaches coming out as an introduction to my mother, how she tells stories. And in the book, I put our relationship. I very often had to keep on redirecting her to stay on point, because she will go off on tangents, or start something that didn't seem to be connected, but later on she would. Um, and and the cockroaches later on become a metaphor, for the movement that basically brought down the island. And you have, coming from the woodwork, all the different people that supported Fidel Castro, um, and 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 becoming part of the persecution, becoming part of the oppression, becoming part and enabling the authoritarian regime. So um, it's when I saw the connection, and you call it poetry, I guess the poet connects in the mundane with the meaningful. Um,
It is poetry. My editor, Carrie Newman from Fortress Press, says that all writing is poetry. He says even putting a piece of IKEA furniture together is poetry. But you are so, the other thing that Carrie taught me is to show, not tell. And you show us who these people are. You show us what their experiences are. And the dialogue is a wonderful tool for doing that. And so I'm delighted that yours will be the first, other than Brueggemann and Carrie Newman, yours is the first book with Santos Books. And the tagline for Santos Books is every story sacred. And we've really featured memoirs. And so yours is just kind of a classic of what I want Santos books to be. Can you tell us what's sacred about this story to you as part of the family and looking in on and being part of these conversations? What became sacred to you about all of this?
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. It's a very important question. Sacredness is that which we hold that is precious to us because we see it as coming from God. And sometimes sacred is something that's been given to us that we possibly may not deserve. And we realize how have we been blessed by this. And it wasn't until I was a full-grown, mature man in my 40s that I began to realize that the Cuban side of my culture, I'm Cuban American, the Cuban side of my culture is truly a gift. And it has shaped my worldview, it has shaped my relationships, and it really determines how I move through life. This decade of the 1950s was a very, very important decade in the history of the island, and for the two families as well in their family history. So much of what happened there shaped the families and determined a pathway that would lead them to the United States to start all over again. And the sacredness comes, first of all, from the sense of loss. So much was lost, and these were families that had a future on the island, an invested future. On my mother's side, the business, they were a successful business class. And then on my father's side, they were intellectuals, they were academics, and they were politicians, very much invested in democracy, and had studied democracy in all its forms, and wanted to see the island become a model for all of the Caribbean and Latin America. And so to pour their hearts and their lives into avoiding such a catastrophic outcome, and then being exiled into the United States, has shaped us as a family. And then I grew up in the United States listening to these stories. And as a young person, I would always roll my eyes and go, oh my God, here comes mom again talking about this, or here comes grandpa once again talking about Cuba. And I didn't really appreciate it until later, having to read and having to learn about the island. The other thing is, when we talk about sacred, it has a connotation that it's God given. It comes from God. It's good, and then the destruction that happened with democracy's demise, and the destruction that led to it, because there was a lot of violence before the Castro Revolution. It's just indicative of our struggle in humanity. How do we struggle with these two sides that we have? We have, the side that could love, that could sustain, that could create. But then we also have a very destructive side, a selfish side, a side of greed, a side of bigotry, and so there's this juxtaposition of those two sides of humanity happening simultaneously in the book. And one of the characters that I placed in there, secondary characters, was a madman. And he historically lived. He was the Parisian gentleman, because he was very gentle, and he could recite poetry. But often it is through him that I describe a clear picture of the madness that was entering into the island. And so he's described as a madman, but actually the madness was all around him. And it's very intriguing way to approach history from that point of view.
It's a not so subtle reminder in our own country's context of what's happening around us. Can you speak to that? how this book, this Cuban memoir, speaks to what's happening in our own country right now?
Absolutely, absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up. So the the thing is that when you know Cuban history as this, and you start seeing the path and the steps that were taken that led to the fall of democracy. You see the rise of a political figure who was very authoritarian and became a dictator, Fulgencio Batista. And the thing is that when he became the dictator, like nobody complained. The university students complained, and academic people and it was elite complaint, but everybody else just went on their business. And why? Well, because the economy was good, and there was a lot of money flowing through the island, and so the people said, well, as long as we got money, as long as there's jobs and there's plenty of money for us, we really don't care who's um, seated on that chair as president. And he led a very, very oppressive regime, a very, very violent regime. And for the most part, the majority of the island allowed it to happen. And even though there were strong critics and there was a lot of smart people speaking against it, business went on as usual, and it became the new normal. It kind of like became, like this is what people experience. Yeah, this is how it kind of is, and we just kind of just move on. And to the point that it was almost bizarre, the things that they can get away with. And and I'd lay that side by side in a for those of us who know our current history, with the last 10 years, the new normal here has become bizarre by so many standards, and yet people just allow it. People excuse it, and the people who are wanting to vote for Donald J. Trump, for the most part, they just say, it's about money. It's about increasing, their wealth and the wealth of a class that is being duped into thinking that they will benefit from it. And so there's this creation of a new reality, a new political reality that is very dangerous. It's very dangerous because if we put it side by side with Cuba's lessons, it's not Donald J. Trump that we have to fear. It's the person who follows. It's the person that comes after Donald J. Trump that might really, really ratchet things up to a whole new level, the way that Fidel Castro did. And so consequently, it became imperative that we as a nation should win the elections of 2020, and that Joe Biden became our 46th president. But the threat is still there. The threat is still among us. And so it's imperative that Kamala Harris win this next election so that we could change what is normal. So we could, turn the page as the campaign is doing so effectively, and start again to a new sense of stability and a new level of expectations for our politicians that would, keep the butterfly alive, and that would sustain our democratic values. Otherwise, the danger is, the lesson of an island that's just 90 miles away, of a people who lost their democracy and haven't been able to regain it.
I love your book for so many reasons, but one of the reasons is that it is so poignantly sociological. And so this idea that life happens and we never challenge the realities around us. The realities slowly change, the norms slowly change, but we still don't challenge the reality, and we adjust to the norms. We adjust to the new norms. And your book shows us how that happened in Cuba. It reminds us of how it's happening now. I also love your book because it reminds me of the sociological imagination that I teach my students every semester, that what happens on the macro level pushes down on the individual and eventually influences and subjects the individual, victimizes the individual. And so we can live as individuals as if there's nothing happening up here and there won't be a November 5th or November 6th, but there will be a November 5th and November 6th after the election. And we somehow don't think about that. But the macro pushes down on the micro and has an effect on us. And I think your book is so effective at holding both of those together, Guillermo, that there's this world taking place, this change taking place in Cuba, even as your own family is experiencing it in a variety of different ways. And it has an effect on them. And I guess I would just conclude with one question. I'd love to keep talking to you, and we will be back right before the book comes out. But my question is this: how has this impacted you? So if the macro level impacts us, you're a generation or two away. How has it impacted you besides the writing of the book? And maybe it's largely the writing of the book, that what happened in Cuba impacted you.
Yeah, well, it's a sense of appreciation and gratitude for what we have here in the United States. A sense of let's not take it for granted, because it could very easily fall apart. Um, it helps me bring the conversations with others to what is it that's really important, to what is it that is at the heart of it. I have a relative who talks about how our society is becoming more and more violent, and this and that and the other, and we have to vote for a president that will be law and order, and put all these young people back into place and so forth. That's very reminiscent of the language of the people who liked Batista. And Batista, who said, I'm going to put all this corruption back in its place, and we will have law and order. And I had to, in the conversation, bring the person around to try to see the bigger picture, and to how possibly he might be manipulated by these slogans and by these portrayals of a situation that is, supposedly it needs to be put back into shape. And the tendency to dominate, because that's the only way you'll get order, is downright the sinful part of all this. When a politician just wants to dominate society and establish an order, the question has to be asked: well, whose order will it be, and how is that going to affect all the different marginalized groups? And so that's why democracy is so beautiful and so important, because it gives everybody a voice. It brings everybody to the table. It has this equalizing factor, that one vote, per person. But then the different groups feel that they have ownership in how the country is steered. But if we try to go ahead and subjugate and silence voices and demean them and demonize them, then it's distorting the entire democratic process, so that it doesn't become what it was intended to be.
It's beautiful, and yet, as you remind us, very fragile. And Trump, of course, is a product of a culture, and is reinforcing that culture. And so your reminder is haunting, that it's not Trump we need to fear, it's who follows Trump. And I'd say, regardless of who's elected, the culture is going to continue to bear witness to the violence, the oppression that you talk about in Cuba. Thank you, Guillermo, for being with us. It's been a
Thank you,
delight to
Conrad.
talk with you, and we'll be back in touch. The book will be out in January, folks, but you'll hear from us before that. And thank you again. Blessings to you.
Blessings, Conrad. Thank you very much.
Yeah.